So this tutorial will take you through what we call our upstream elements. These are element lab, element animal, and element session. We put these together in the context of our repository workflow session to give you a demonstration of how to ingest this kind of information and a very clean example of how to query a DataJoint database. So first, the type of information we're keeping track of here is probably not what a researcher is the most excited about collecting, but it's certainly important to keeping good records. First, element lab helps keep track of the projects within a lab, as well as the users and researchers, their roles within a given lab. It can be useful to keep track of protocol data, especially with many ongoing projects, and link this data to your specific experimental sessions. We keep track of subjects, particularly animal management in the context of element animal. So this has two schema: first, subject, and second, genotyping. Subject is what generally gets linked from lab to animal to session, and then genotyping information, genetic information that maybe not every lab is interested in keeping track of, but certainly in the context of experiments where you're managing animals, you're interested in knowing potentially their lineage and how that may be a predictor in your study. Element session is generally where the lab animal connect to your specific elements for other modalities. So subject can connect to session, session can then be connected to your calcium imaging pipeline or your pose estimation pipeline. It's really the point of convergence between these upstream, more general data types, and then the modality specific data types. The connections here between the central session table and project session, session and experimenter can also link up to different pieces of element lab, just so that you're not, so that you can keep track of the researchers within a lab conducting a particular experiment. This repository workflow session provides a demonstration of how these elements can work together. To get it up and running, we recommend cloning lab, animal, session, and then this current repository workflow session all into the same place, and then pip installing each of those four. The first thing you'll want to do to get this workflow up and running is set up a DJ local config file. There are ways to set up DataJoint configuration in a machine global manner, but in my experience, the easiest way to manage a specific workflow is to have a dedicated configuration that specifies your credentials as well as the database you're connecting to. Here we have the database prefix. So whenever you call any of the schemas as part of your pipeline, this prefix will be used when declaring the name of that schema on the host. So if, for example, you wanted to separate projects by schema prefix, that would be useful, or potentially you're interested in managing an individual user's permissions by way of a schema prefix. Looking into the notebook we provide here, the first thing you'll notice is that we're just going one directory up to the parent level directory where we have this config file, such that when we connect to the database, we'll automatically be connected using the credentials from that config file. When it comes to calling each of the schema into the current namespace, the format we tend to use is calling the pipeline from a given workflow to import each of the individual schema. To show you what that pipeline looks like, we can take a look at this workflow session directory. And here we're calling on each of the individual elements to bring them into the namespace. And then for each of those elements, we are activating that schema. The activation process adds your database prefix to the standard name for the schema, and then allows that schema access to things in the activating modules namespace through this linking module feature. Turning back to the notebook, this workflow session then provides ingestion functions for each of the schemas. So these ingestion functions housed here are really just ways of linking CSV data to a given element, and then ingesting that CSV data into the corresponding tables. This generalized ingestion function takes a list of CSVs and a list of tables that you'd be interested in adding that CSV data into, and loops through those lists in order. The following functions, ingest lab and then ingest subjects and sessions, are really just ways of putting together those lists and looping through this ingest general function. So for a given project, you could import the DataJoint elements, these upstream elements, and then add your specific project information into each of these CSVs. These could also be edited to add information to a custom schema. Once you have this up and running, connected to a database with the sample data ingested, you'll be able to then explore each of these tables individually. So the commands here will either give you a printout of the table, or you can call for a diagram to show the relationship between each of these tables. The describe function here gives you the contents of the table definition in each of those schema. You could go to the element and look in the Python script that establishes those table definitions, or in the context of maybe a multi-site project, when you're connecting to a database that maybe you don't have the original version of the schema for, this describe function can give you not only the table headers, but data type information as well. So here in this notebook, we're providing examples of how to manually add data. If you're not interested in using those ingestion functions, maybe you're running subjects one at a time. Subject.subject.insert allows you to insert subjects one at a time, or you can add subjects, sessions, as tuples, or as dictionary, or tuple of dictionaries. If you're interested in more of a graphical user interface GUI approach, I'd recommend looking into DataJoint lab book as a way to provide a GUI to insert this kind of information. So please add your questions in the comments. I'll add some more links in the description that will go into more detail on each of these elements.